Many people notice that after a social interaction ends, the mind does not immediately let go of the experience. Instead, the conversation may return repeatedly in thought. A person might recall what was said, how it was said, and how the other individual responded. Small details that seemed unimportant at the time can become more noticeable when remembered later. The brain begins reconstructing the interaction, almost as if it is replaying the event in order to examine it more closely. This pattern is commonly described as mentally replaying social interactions. Psychology suggests that this process reflects how the brain studies communication after it occurs. Social interactions often involve subtle signals, including tone, expression, and timing. These elements can be difficult to fully process in the moment. After the interaction ends, the mind returns to the experience and begins analyzing it in greater detail, attempting to understand how the exchange unfolded. Memory plays a central role in why the brain revisits social interactions. When an experience occurs, the brain does not store it as a perfect recording. Instead, it encodes key elements of the interaction, including words, emotions, and reactions. After the event, the mind may return to these stored elements and begin reconstructing the situation. During this reconstruction, the brain may reorganize the sequence of events, focusing on specific details that appear meaningful. A particular sentence, a pause in conversation, or a change in tone may stand out more clearly during reflection than it did during the original interaction. As the mind continues revisiting the experience, the interaction may feel more detailed or significant. The brain is not simply remembering the event. It is actively examining the stored information while attempting to understand what occurred. Another reason the brain replays social interactions is the complexity of human communication. Conversations rarely follow a simple or predictable structure. Each exchange involves multiple layers of meaning, including what is said directly and what may be implied indirectly. Because of this complexity, the brain may not fully interpret every aspect of the interaction in real time. After the conversation ends, the mind returns to the experience and begins analyzing it more carefully. It may examine whether certain words carried additional meaning or whether a response could be interpreted in different ways. The brain studies how the interaction might be understood from another person's perspective. Through this process, the mind attempts to clarify details that were not fully resolved during the original exchange, allowing the interaction to be examined in greater depth. Prediction also contributes to why the brain continues replaying interactions after they end. When a conversation occurs, it may influence future communication with the same person. The brain therefore begins examining how the interaction might affect what happens next. The mind may imagine how the other individual interpreted the conversation, or how they might respond in the future. These imagined outcomes become connected to the memory of the interaction. The brain studies how different interpretations could lead to different future scenarios. By linking past events to possible future outcomes, the mind attempts to understand how the interaction may influence what happens next. As a result, the conversation continues appearing in thought, not only as a memory, but also as part of the brain's effort to anticipate future social situations. Another factor that contributes to the replaying of social interactions is the brain's sensitivity to social detail. Human communication includes subtle signals such as facial expressions, tone of voice, and timing. These elements can carry meaning that is not immediately obvious during the interaction itself. After the conversation ends, the brain may begin examining these details more carefully. A slight pause, a change in tone, or a brief expression may appear more significant when reviewed in memory. The mind attempts to understand whether these signals suggest a particular meaning or intention. Because these details are often open to interpretation, the brain may revisit them repeatedly while trying to determine what they represent. Each review of the interaction may bring attention to a different detail, gradually expanding the number of elements being analyzed. Through this process, the mind continues exploring how the interaction might be understood from multiple perspectives. The brain's ability to take another person's perspective also plays an important role in this process. After an interaction ends, the mind may attempt to reconstruct how the other individual experienced the conversation. The brain imagines what the other person might have thought, how they might have interpreted certain statements, and what meaning they may have attached to the exchange. This perspective-taking ability allows the mind to examine the interaction from more than one viewpoint. However, because these interpretations are based on imagination rather than direct knowledge, the brain may continue exploring different possibilities. Each imagined perspective creates a slightly different version of the interaction. The mind compares these versions while attempting to understand which one appears most accurate. As this process continues, the interaction may be replayed multiple times as the brain evaluates how it may have been perceived. Emotional tone can also influence how often an interaction is replayed in the mind. When a conversation carries emotional significance, the brain may give it more attention during reflection. The mind may revisit the interaction in order to understand how the emotions within it developed. A particular moment in the conversation may stand out because it felt meaningful, unexpected, or difficult to interpret. The brain begins examining how that moment connects to the rest of the interaction. Each replay allows the mind to study how the emotional tone shifted over time. Because emotional experiences often involve complex signals, the brain may require multiple reviews to interpret them. As a result, the interaction may continue appearing in thought, while the mind attempts to understand how the emotional elements of the conversation unfolded. Internal dialogue often becomes active when the brain replays social interactions. The mind may begin forming silent sentences that describe what occurred or question how certain moments should be interpreted. One thought may suggest a particular meaning behind a statement, while another thought considers an alternative explanation. This internal exchange resembles a discussion taking place within the mind. Each sentence introduces a possibility that can be examined and compared with others. Because the brain can generate many interpretations quickly, the internal dialogue may continue expanding. The interaction is replayed not only as a memory, but also as an ongoing analysis of what might have been communicated. Through this process, the mind attempts to organize and interpret the experience in greater detail. Another reason the brain continues replaying interactions is its attempt to identify patterns in social behavior. Human communication often follows subtle patterns that are not immediately obvious. After a conversation ends, the mind may begin searching for connections between different parts of the interaction. It may examine how one statement led to another response or how the tone of the exchange changed over time. By identifying these patterns, the brain attempts to understand how the conversation developed. This process allows the mind to study how communication unfolds in real situations. However, because patterns can be interpreted in multiple ways, the brain may revisit the interaction several times while exploring different interpretations. Each replay offers another opportunity to examine how the elements of the conversation may be connected. Timing also plays an important role in how interactions are remembered and replayed. Communication depends not only on what is said, but also on when it is said. A pause, a delayed response, or a quick reply can influence how a statement is interpreted. After the interaction ends, the brain may begin examining the timing of each moment within the conversation. The mind may consider whether a response came too quickly, too slowly, or at exactly the right moment. These variations in timing become part of the analysis. The brain studies how the rhythm of the interaction may have influenced its outcome. Because timing is often subtle and difficult to evaluate in real time, the mind may revisit these details repeatedly. Through this process, the interaction is replayed as the brain examines how timing contributed to the overall exchange. Imagination also contributes to how interactions are replayed in the mind. When recalling a conversation, the brain may not only remember what occurred, but also generate alternative versions of what could have happened. The mind may imagine how the interaction might have unfolded if different words had been used or if the conversation had taken a slightly different direction. These imagined variations become part of the replay process. The brain compares the original interaction with these alternative possibilities, while attempting to understand how small changes might have influenced the outcome. Each imagined version introduces a new perspective on the event. As a result, the interaction may be revisited multiple times as the mind explores how it could have developed differently. Attention also influences how long the brain continues replaying a social interaction. When the mind focuses strongly on a particular experience, it may continue examining it even after the main details have already been considered. The brain begins revisiting the interaction again, searching for additional information that may clarify what occurred. During this process, the mind may notice details that were not previously recognized. Each new observation adds another layer to the analysis. Because attention remains directed toward the interaction, the replay process may continue for an extended period. The brain is attempting to understand the experience more completely by examining it from multiple angles. This extended focus can make the interaction feel more significant than it originally appeared. Another factor that keeps social interactions active in thought is the brain's attempt to reduce uncertainty. After a conversation ends, there may still be elements that feel unclear or unresolved. The mind begins examining these moments in order to understand them more fully. It may focus on a particular statement, a reaction, or a shift in tone that seemed difficult to interpret. Because these elements do not have a single clear meaning, the brain may generate several possible explanations. Each explanation represents a different interpretation of the interaction. The mind compares these possibilities while attempting to determine which one appears most consistent with the rest of the conversation. As long as uncertainty remains, the brain may continue revisiting the interaction in search of clarity. This process reflects the mind's effort to interpret information that was not fully understood during the original exchange. Social awareness also contributes to how interactions are replayed. Human communication often involves considering how one's words may affect another person. After an interaction ends, the brain may revisit the conversation in order to examine how it might have been received. The mind may imagine how certain statements were interpreted and whether they produced the intended meaning. Because these interpretations are not directly observable, the brain may continue exploring them through reflection. Each imagined perspective introduces a new way of understanding the interaction. The mind compares these possibilities while attempting to understand how the communication may have been perceived. This process allows the brain to study how language influences social interaction. Internal dialogue often becomes more structured as the brain continues analyzing an interaction. Thoughts may appear as complete sentences that describe what occurred, or propose explanations for certain moments. One thought may suggest that a statement was interpreted in a particular way, while another thought considers an alternative explanation. This internal exchange resembles a discussion taking place within the mind. Each sentence introduces a possibility that can be examined and compared with others. Because the brain can generate many interpretations quickly, the dialogue may continue expanding. The interaction is replayed not only as a memory, but also as a series of interpretations that the mind attempts to organize. Through this process, the brain studies how communication may be understood from different perspectives. The passage of time can also change how an interaction is replayed in the mind. As new information becomes available, the brain may adjust its understanding of the conversation. A person may remember an additional detail or reconsider how a particular moment should be interpreted. These changes influence how the interaction appears in thought. The mind may revisit earlier conclusions and compare them with the updated interpretation. Each adjustment creates a slightly different version of the memory. Through this process, The replay of the interaction evolves over time. The brain continues analyzing how the elements of the conversation connect with one another. This ongoing adjustment reflects the mind's effort to integrate new information into its understanding of the experience. Another reason interactions are replayed is the brain's focus on sequence. Conversations unfold as a series of connected moments where each response influences the next. After the interaction ends, the mind may reconstruct this sequence step by step. It examines how one statement led to another and how the exchange developed over time. By studying this sequence, the brain attempts to understand how the interaction progressed. Each replay allows the mind to observe the structure of the conversation more clearly. Because sequences can be interpreted in different ways, the brain may revisit the interaction multiple times, while imagination also contributes to the persistence of these replays. When recalling an interaction, the brain may generate additional possibilities that were not part of the original conversation. The mind may imagine how the discussion could have continued or how it might unfold in the future. These imagined extensions become connected to the original memory. The brain compares the actual interaction with these possible developments while attempting to understand how communication might evolve over time. Each imagined extension introduces another layer to the replay process. As a result, the interaction may continue appearing in thought as the mind explores how it could develop beyond its original form. Memory reconstruction also influences how interactions are replayed. Each time the brain recalls a conversation, it rebuilds the memory using stored details and current interpretation. This process can slightly change how the interaction appears in thought. Certain elements may become more prominent, while others may fade into the background. The mind may emphasize particular moments that seem meaningful or uncertain. As the interaction is reconstructed, the brain may reinterpret how certain statements were understood. This ongoing reconstruction means that the replay is not identical each time it occurs. Instead, it evolves as the mind continues analyzing the experience. Quiet environments often encourage the brain to revisit social interactions. When external activity is reduced, the mind naturally turns inward. Without immediate tasks demanding attention, memory and imagination become more active. The brain may return to recent conversations and begin analyzing them in greater detail. During these moments, the interaction may feel more vivid because the mind is focusing on it without distraction. Each replay allows the brain to examine additional elements that were not previously considered. This reflective state supports the continuation of the analysis. The interaction remains active in thought as the mind explores its details more thoroughly. From a psychological perspective, replaying social interactions reveals how actively the brain studies communication. Human conversations involve complex combinations of language, emotion, and timing. By revisiting these interactions, the mind attempts to understand how these elements work together. Each replay provides an opportunity to examine how the exchange unfolded and how it might be interpreted. The brain compares different possibilities while attempting to identify consistent patterns. Through this process, the mind develops a deeper understanding of how communication operates. The repeated replay reflects the brain's effort to analyze experiences that are important for navigating social environments. When viewed more broadly, the brain replaying social interactions becomes easier to understand. Human thinking constantly attempts to interpret experiences and anticipate future situations. Conversations are a central part of social life, so the mind naturally spends time examining how they unfold. By revisiting interactions, the brain studies language, reactions, and outcomes in greater detail. What may appear to be repetitive thinking often reflects a deeper cognitive process. The mind is analyzing how communication works and how it might influence future interactions. Each replay is part of the brain's effort to understand the structure of social experience. Replaying social interactions, therefore, reflects how actively the brain studies communication beyond the moment in which it occurs. Human conversations involve multiple layers of meaning, including language, tone, timing, and interpretation. Because these elements unfold quickly, the mind may not fully process every detail while the interaction is happening. Afterward, the brain returns to the experience and begins examining it more carefully. The replay allows the mind to observe how different parts of the conversation may connect with one another. A particular statement may take on new meaning when considered alongside a reaction that followed later in the exchange. The brain compares these elements while attempting to understand how the interaction developed as a whole. Through repeated examination, the mind gradually builds a more complete interpretation of what occurred. What appears as repetitive thinking is often the brain continuing its effort to analyze communication, interpret meaning, and understand how social interactions unfold across time. Each replay becomes part of a broader process in which the mind studies how language and response combine to shape human experience.